Fired up. It's made a great decision.
Great teammates, coaches, and other people who want to be Super Bowl champions. And we are. We're going to do it this year.
And we're going places because we want to go places.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Let's start with the news first in the coaching department for the Lions, and this is that they had announced on Monday that they have parted ways with defensive backs coach Aubrey Pleasant. They fired Aubrey Pleasant, the defensive backs coach who, as you guys may know, I loved this hiring originally when the Lions made it with Aubrey Pleasant. The resume that he had when he was coming here from the outside looking in, the accomplishments, how players improved under Aubrey Pleasant, just all of those things that you could look at statistically, what Aubrey Pleasant was bringing to the table. I loved this hiring. He was my favorite positional coach hiring, and now Monday he was announced that he had been let go basically by the Detroit Lions, and that position is going to be filled in by guys like Brian Duker, and some of the other assistants that they have there are going to be taking on a bigger role. Now, according to Dan Campbell's press conference, really the two major things that you take away is, number one, he wants to make sure that they're all on the same page. It's basically kind of questioning that positional group being on the same page with what they're looking for. We'll talk a little bit about that. And also, he said it was all encompassing. I think basically just taking a look at the fact that the Detroit Lions passing defense has not improved this season. It's been still very bad this season, and it's been one of the worst in the league now for last year and this far into this season. Objectively looking at this Lions defense as a whole, and you break it down by positional groups, the biggest issue for this Lions defense has been the cornerback position. Defensive backs, but specifically the cornerback position, has been the biggest issue with this defense, which is his positional group, his department. Now, there's going to be questions on that firing, and I'm not here to say whether or not I think it was the right firing, but I'm here to say this, that all I think that this firing does is it puts the spotlight on Aaron Glenn and, of course, on Dan Campbell. Now, to me, it was already on those two guys. If these guys have confirmed that they should be here, this or that, right? You always have to prove it and earn it. And to me, the spotlight was already on those two. But this move absolutely put it right on these two guys, okay? Now, for Dan Campbell's sake, even aside from that, I mean, you could just look at, of course, the false starts. The fact that last year we led the league in false starts. This year we're still top 10 in false starts. The decisions on, hey, not going for it against Minnesota, or last year going for it against Chicago when we just kind of hurry up and snapped it. Like, my issues that I've had in certain down and distance situations where it almost looks like Dan Campbell just is like not losing his mind over it, when it's like, why are we not losing our mind over this situation? Like, I've had my questions with that, of course, so far this season, and of course the record, right? The fact that we haven't scored in the last few games in the second half, right? Shooting ourselves in the foot a lot of times. On top of that, the record, of course, kind of speaks for itself. But what's interesting is that this made me really want to dive into a lot of the numbers and things like that more with this firing. Because, again, this just puts the emphasis on these two guys, right? You think about it from the perspective of, okay, the defense as a whole is not performing very well. They weren't good last year, and they haven't been good so far this season. They're not performing very well. But yet Dan Campbell basically leaps past the defensive coordinator and makes the decision to fire the defensive backs coach, which I do agree. The cornerback position has been the biggest issue with this defense. That's why I said the first game Jerry Jacobs starts, they'll win that game. Last year I said that with Decker. We tied the first game he came back and started, which was Pittsburgh. Okay, and we got a lot better from there on out. So I do agree that that is the biggest issue that we have. That's not necessarily saying that you should have fired Aubrey Pleasant, but he made that move. They made that move. He jumped past the defensive coordinator. If the guy's not really doing what you want them to do, wouldn't you see that in practice? Like, why is it game time that you're now discovering, like, oh, this guy is not doing what maybe we were trying to coach them to do? And then that being on the defensive backs coach is weird. I mean, it could happen. I'm not saying it didn't. There was an interesting clip from that last game against Miami, which I did save, where you could see on this play, it almost looks like the Lions are creating that umbrella. They played a lot of cover 3 in this game. We'll go to the film the next couple of days. But on this play, it looks like because they put Will Harris in, the Lions basically lived in sub-package in this game with Will Harris and Juju Hughes sliding down the box, kind of creating that umbrella over top. On this play, it looks like Will Harris is getting out there to almost contain, and Amani Oruwariye, they're probably wanting to just dive down and go make the play. But instead, you can see Amani kind of fades back as if he's trying to contain on this play as well, and it picks up a big chunk run. It's emphasized with these runs that get outside, because they're all about speed offensively, that they would worked on this all week. And this is something we've seen the Lions have issue with, is the pulling outside offensive lineman and the crackdown block by the receiver and not being able to get that contained. I think there was also another run that was brought up, but that's the one that I noted. And then after that play, there was a replay, which I didn't hear what they were saying because I was watching it without audio because we were at the game that I rewatched, then did some all 22 stuff. But you could see the replay where it looks like Aaron Glenn's a little bit upset there, clearly with Aubrey Pleasant. It still feels weird to me because it's like, if that's something that you thought was an issue, you didn't notice that in practice. Regardless, it just puts the focus on that for me, but it made me want to dive into some of these numbers even more. So clearly, one of the biggest issues, or the biggest issue, I would say, of course, is the wins. The Lions aren't winning very many games, and for the last season and a half, basically, that the Lions have now played 7 games so far through this season, a big issue has been that they have not won close games. Dan Campbell's current record in close games is 2-10-1, meaning 1 score or less. We are 2-10-1 with Dan Campbell. Now, not all of these games have fallen on the defensive side, but what's interesting is that when you really look at all of these games individually, and then you take a look at the past Lions and when they had success winning close games and when they didn't have success winning close games, what's interesting is that historically, winning 1-score games, to an extent, almost is, I wouldn't say lucky, but it's very hard to predict. For example, the Detroit Lions back in 2014, they were 6-2 in 1-score games. Why it's difficult to predict is because it's tough to find that consistency from one year to the next, where they were 6-2 this year in 1-score games, then all of a sudden the next season they're 7 wins, they're 7-9, and that has happened across the league. Team's record is greatly impacted by their successive 1-score games. The next season, their record drops. It's not as good as it was the year before. You take an example like the Raiders last season making the playoffs. Very good in 1-score games. Obviously, this season, you could see what their record is. Buffalo, they've been terrible in 1-score games, but they haven't been in a ton of 1-score games, and they basically blow everybody out aside from those 1-score games. Those are the only games that they really play in. Green Bay with Matt LaFleur, they've been outstanding in 1-score games historically. They've been great. So far this season, they're 2-2, and you can see what their record is. They were 8-1 at a point there with Matt LaFleur. They were 15-3 at a point there with Matt LaFleur. And now 2-2, you can see what their record is. So 1-score games have been a little bit unpredictable and a little bit difficult. But one thing that I noticed for the Lions specifically historically, but also even looking at some other teams like the Patriots and how they've won their close games, but also how many close games you get into, because that's another factor as well. If you're playing in a lot of close games, there's even more unpredictability to that. But how do you win those close games? So I did my own digging. I said, okay, how in the past did the Lions win these 1-score games? How are they losing those 1-score games now? And overwhelmingly, the defensive side of the ball is the reason that we won the 1-score games. Now, that may seem obvious. Well, yeah, if you have a better defense, you're going to get off the field. But I'm saying specifically in those critical moments of the game. I'm saying the last drive, the last 2 drives, right? You're either coming from behind or you need a stop to not allow them to score, right? So either a team's trying to run the clock on you or they're trying to go score a touchdown fast. Your defense in those situations has a very overwhelmingly majority of the time been the reason whether or not you win or lose that football game. And of course, with the Detroit Lions, so far this season, and for a majority of the time last year, it's been defensively, we have not made the plays defensively to win it. I've discussed this many times, especially off camera. Like, one big difference, of course, now is that we're not even getting an opportunity in a lot of these games to get the offense back on the field, whether that's Philadelphia, whether that's this past week. We're not even getting an opportunity for the offense to get back on the field and see if they can go win the football game because we can't get the football back. And when you look at these past 2 years and you compare it to, say, the last time the Lions made the playoffs or the last time the Lions, won 10-plus games, 11-5 in 2014, that great season, and you take a look at the Lions in close games. Let's start with 2014. The Lions were 6-2 in 1-score games in 2014. Okay, 6-2. So that means outside of those games, they were 5-3. Well, how were they winning these, right? Because as we know, statistically, Stafford had all these comeback wins, all of these things. Was he just that great? And yes, he was great. He's one of the best clutch, one-drive type of quarterbacks of all time, right? We understand this. But what's interesting is that you could just go down the line of each one of these games. Jets, Bills, Saints, Falcons, Dolphins, Cardinals, Vikings, Bears, playoffs, and pretty much every single time that we won a close score game, the defense was the side that made the play. Because again, it's either the other team is trying to run the clock out because they got the lead, or they're trying to keep you from scoring, so they make a play like an interception. Give some examples, like for example, the Saints in 2014, we won 24-23. Well, we had an interception that set up the touchdown. Glover Quinn had an interception to set up the touchdown. So we didn't just get the touchdown, we got set up at like their 25-yard line, set up by a defensive play. The Falcons, right? 21-0 at half, okay? So of course, all you're thinking there is offense. But then you also have to look at the fact that their second half defense was punt, interception, punt, punt. right? And one of those interceptions set you up to get a field goal. I think they actually end up kicking a field. They may have scored a touchdown on that drive, but I think they kicked a field goal. Offense, the very next time, 20-16 they won. They got a 3-and-out defensively, and they went down and scored a touchdown. Minnesota that year, 16-14. They had downs, missed field goal. There you go. That's how they ended it defensively. So when you really look at all of them, you can go through all of them. That's a majority of the time how you win those close games. What's interesting about that as well is I looked at Matthew Stafford and how he performed in those games, just to kind of cement this and really see what's happening here. Now, different situation, right? We have a better offensive line. He's getting sacked a lot more, all of these things. But the point is, Matthew Stafford's quarterback rating in all of those one-score games in 2014, not including the playoff game against Dallas. Offensively, maybe they didn't make the stops necessarily, and offensively, they also went touchdown, fumble. But if you take a look at his stat line on that 2014 season, in those one-score games, he had a 33.9 quarterback rating. That was the regular season stat line he had in all those games on average, a 33.9 quarterback rating on average. I took each game's quarterback rating. There was only one that was really good, and that was the one against the Jets. Aside from that, most of them were pretty poor. There wasn't even one outside of that one that was over a 40 quarterback rating, which takes into account, all the stats across the board. That would be 29th in 2014. 29th quarterback rating, yet we were 6-2 in one-score games in 2014. Now, we know the Lions had a great defense in 2014, and we'll talk about like the money spending a little bit as well, even though I don't think it's too important because a lot of it is timing. Like when you draft a player, okay, well, his contract usually is cheaper than you just went out and signed a guy. So that's usually what it is. But in this season, they had the 11th highest paid defense. They also had the top defense in the league, though, with the 11th highest paid. Taking a look at this season in 2022, all the one-score games we've played in, which has been 4 games so far this season, right? You had the opener against Philly, you had Minnesota, you had Seattle, and you had this past game against the Dolphins. Jared Goff's quarterback rating, on average in those games, is a 69.6. That would be 4th in the NFL. Now, in the season, he's 13th. That would be 4th in the NFL in all of the one-score games. But, of course, the difference is we weren't able to get off the field. Now, there is a game like Dallas, for example, where it didn't end up being a one-score game, but the offense fumbled and they could have won the game. So there are those which are always going to be skewed when you look at these numbers as a whole. For example, 2021, we lost to the Rams by 9, but technically the interception, we did have an opportunity to go win the game right there. But a majority of the time, the Lions defensively are not getting the stops. You can even look at that 2016 season when 8 of our 9 wins were one-score games. And what's interesting about that, by the way, as a whole, is that really since that time, going back to 2014, maybe even beyond, the Lions play in a ton of one-score games. Okay, they are in a ton of one-score games, which does speak to a little bit of the issue of the fact that as a team, we're definitely not on that level of, say, a Buffalo Bills, where the Buffalo Bills don't really play that many one-score games. When they do, they can lose those. But aside from that, they basically beat everybody else by more than one score touchdown. The Lions, since really the 2014 and probably even more beyond that, they play in a ton of one-score games, and either they win those or they lose those. That's pretty much where the Lions have been at. They either win a one-score games or they lose the one-score games, right? So a lot of times where the Lions have been at. You can even look at 2016, though. Similar things. When the Lions won those games, the defense was the team to make the play. The Eagles, we forced a fumble, set us up in field goal range, we kicked a field goal and won the game. The Rams, a punt and an interception, we won that football game. There are the ones like Washington where the offense just went down and scored a touchdown after they allowed a touchdown defensively. But again, a majority of the time it's the defense that makes the stop. Well, let's take a look at 2022 and 2021 for the Lions. We just hit on so far this season. You take a look at all the one-score games. You have Philadelphia. Lions lost by 3. They couldn't get the ball back, right? 3:51. They could not get their offense back on the field. They could not get a stop. There was a big run that was broke on a 3rd and 2 on a zone run, and then there was also the 4th down and 1 that they converted, but we couldn't get off the field there. You take a look at the Minnesota Vikings game. It was a breakdown in coverage that we had between, I believe it was A.J. Parker and Juju Hughes on that play who came into the game, and he gave up 2 big chunk plays in a row, and he gave up a big passing touchdown. Now, the decision again there comes back to Dan Campbell as well. His decision to try to take a field goal there made no sense to me. I don't think anybody believed that made any sense, especially if they already missed one to go up 6. Didn't make sense. But regardless, you were still up 3, and their defense, pass defense there, gave up the touchdown. Seattle could not get off the field in that game basically at all. I mean, we never got off the field in that game. But a drive before, you had a 3rd down, and they broke it for a touchdown run. You had 2 third downs that they broke for touchdown runs schematically because of how you were lined up personnel-wise. Miami this past week, right? You had a 3rd down and 8. Will Harris gets beat off the line, and man coverage, and we don't get the pressure that maybe we would have liked to have there to extend the play, and they convert, which, by the way, I still think that one was really tight. I'm not going to complain about it. It is what it is, right? But still, I mean, I'm looking at the replay of this. This is why I would like to see Dan Campbell get fired up. Okay, I don't know if he did or not, but he should have been fired up here, because worst case that happens, they throw you out of the game. The game's over anyway. But to me, it's like, dude, I just called a timeout. We need to be really looking at this. They didn't even measure it. They just moved it on. You could see him move it forward. I don't know. Anyways, whatever. Let's take a look at 2020, and this is where you have the spotlight that really goes on Aaron Glenn. This is why, and this defense, specifically this pass defense. Okay, so obviously week 1, San Francisco offense. They forced a fumble defensively, so you gave your offense a chance. That time we came up short, right? We came up short. We got stopped at the 25-yard line. Okay, Baltimore, 4th down and 19. Bobby Price is playing the wrong coverage, and they pick up the first down. They end up getting in field goal range. Okay, let's go to Minnesota, 19-17. You go up 1 on 2-point conversion. You have a breakdown and a 2-man defense. Jerry Jacobs in coverage. They get in field goal range. They win the football game. You were up 1. Okay, how about, and again, Los Angeles was one where it doesn't really count, but it is because you threw a pick there. Then you had the tie game. Okay, Cleveland couldn't get off the field and get the ball back. Now, this one was a little bit different because they had the backup quarterback, so I'm not going to get on that one too much. It was less than 3 minutes as well. Chicago, you gave up an 8.5-minute drive on Thanksgiving at home. Then, on your 3rd downs, you had an opportunity to get off the first one, of course. They picked up the completion and a defensive flag. Then the second time on the 3rd and 9, confusion defensively. You get a defensive delay of game because you try to call timeout that you don't have, so now it's 3rd down and 4. And then the very next play, which was confusion with Amani, it looked like. The next play, Will Harris, you're playing on the sticks defensively. You're putting everybody on the line, which again, we know, hey, Aaron Glenn loves to do this. Put everybody on the sticks, but they're playing behind the sticks. So they just basically walk to the first down and sit down. They pick up a first down. They didn't know where the sticks were. So there you go. You lose that football game because they wasted it 8.5 minutes and kicked the field goal and won the football game. It was terrible to see that, man. That hurt. It really did. Minnesota, your one close win. Jared Goff and the offense go down and score a touchdown. Okay, Atlanta, interception, but that was Tim Boyle. So again, and then Green Bay versus back quarterback, you won that game. So this is why the spotlight even more so goes on those guys, because it's different players. It's Jerry Jacobs, it's Bobby Price, it's Juju Hughes, it's Amani not knowing what the play is. It's always someone different. Right? So it's not like I can just point to one guy. Now, yes, do we have moving pieces? We do. But isn't that the coach's job? But that's where I say, where's the spotlight? Well, the spotlight is now on you because there's nowhere else to turn. Whether or not that was the right decision or scapegoat or whatever it was, you fired the defensive backs coach, okay? And if it gets better, awesome. Okay, perfect. Made sense then. Maybe they weren't on the same page. Okay, but it then even goes beyond that, because I can tell you specific examples where the Lions cornerbacks has been a very big problem with the run game, right? No contain, bad discipline. 2 big runs that Cleveland had in that game to seal the deal was a toss and a 2-pull, and a pull 2. Well, the Lions have had issues with that this year still. But again, it's the cornerbacks. But again, you take a look at the cornerbacks, and it's just like this last game where you're not playing the run fits correctly. But the thing is that you've had Aubrey Pleasant now for a full year and 7 games so far this season. So through that time, you didn't feel like that, hey, maybe this guy just he's not getting it done. Now, all of a sudden, the blame goes on him because you take a look at the guy that's in charge of that unit that's not been performing. But I will agree, the secondary, the cornerback position specifically, has been the biggest problem with this defense. It's why I believe Jerry will make such a big impact. But then again, I still have my questions with Aaron Glenn, just from this last game alone. And I've had questions all year. I brought up different examples to you guys. But just this last game alone, there's a play where Amani's playing zone, everybody else is playing man. Is this one of the defensive backs coach things that they're pointing out? Okay, there's, of course, the fast motion that they get us on, where Will Harris runs into Okudah. But I've had questions beyond that. A 0 coverage on a 3rd and 13. Why would we do that? Tua and this Dolphins offense I've seen on film will check it down when it's 3rd and long. And they did later. But you played 0 coverage on 3rd and 13. AJ Parker on Tyreek Hill. I don't know how that makes any sense. You did that, runs right past him. Simple as that. He ran right past AJ Parker in the slot corner. There's also those downs. And by the way, the Lions are allowing over a 50% conversion rate on 3rd down. But he ran right past AJ Parker on the 3rd down. Or playing Julian at off-ball linebacker. I don't know why that makes sense. I get it if you're putting him out there to show rush and he drops. But when you line him up as an off-ball linebacker, I'm just confused. Are you going to rush him from that position? Because he's not walking up on the line. So I'm not sure why he's even in the game. Because what threat is that? If he rushes 5 yards off the line, he's not going to get there. Why even do that? You have him play off-ball linebacker on a 3rd and goal, and he gets called for a defensive flag. But why would he be in that position? Sometimes you make wrong hires. Right? Maybe Anthony Lynn wasn't the right hire, even though I still feel like a big part of that still was the fact that you got players back, you got an offensive tackle back, and that immediately changed a lot. But Ben Johnson played a bigger role, and Ben Johnson has shown to this part of the season that absolutely he's proved himself. Absolutely. He makes it work with different players, guys mixing in and out. One of the best teams in the red zone, which is a massive improvement for last year. Like, there are ways to measure Ben Johnson's success. However, when you flip it, You have to ask yourself, how are the Lions measuring success here with the Lions coaching staff and Dan Campbell and defensively? And again, I talked about the inconsistencies of winning one-score games, but there has to be a way to measure it aside from, man, we just like these guys, so we're keeping them. Like, no, there's got to be a way to measure success and improvement. Right now, of course, there just hasn't been that improvement in the back end. I mean, last season, we knew this was a problem. The Lions graded out as the second worst coverage cornerback unit and the fifth worst safety coverage unit in terms of playing coverage correctly. That was by Pro Football Focus. I just thought I would throw that out there because I thought it was interesting. But it expands on what we knew last season about the defensive back position. So again, the firing is what the firing is. I feel really bad for Aubrey Pleasant. I'm wishing him the best. But all it does to me is it just emphasizes, okay, it better get better now. Because what it does, if it doesn't get better, there's nowhere else to point. I mean, there is nowhere else. You're not going to fire the guy that took place of Aubrey Pleasant. Like, hey, that guy's not doing a good job either. And I don't want that to be allowed to be an excuse. It comes back to you. And it's been beyond just what the secondary has done, but that it was a big-time issue last year, and it is still a big-time issue this year. Understandable, right? There is money they have to put into certain units and investments, and it's tough to just measure this straight up. For example, Michael Brockers really isn't playing, and he takes up a massive part of your cap, and of course, next year he's probably going to be cut, so you'll save like $10 million in cap space. Same thing kind of offensively, not to the same extent, though, because we put more money into that just because of the timing and contracts. Big V's not really playing, though, but, the offense still doing a thing. But again, timing and contracts. But still, the Lions defense, if you want to go by the salary cap for this year, positional spending, is the 20th highest paid defensive unit. I don't get caught up in that because it's timing anyway. But the point is the Lions this season are allowing 420 yards per game and 32 points per game. Those are both last in the league. Now, the offense is the sixth highest paid offense in the NFL, and they are averaging 394 yards per game. That's fourth in the league, and 24.7 points per game, which is tied for ninth in the league. So they're basically doing what they should do if you just go by the positional spending. We'll bring up quarterback. I'm not going to go around this rabbit hole right now because this video will be too long, but we've discussed it. You look at his salary cap hit, it will be very reasonable for the Lions, especially these next two seasons. And obviously, that's not been the issue. You got the worst defense by far ranking-wise. You know what's interesting? We talk about these one-score games. I look back at Patricia's tenure as well because, again, we lost a lot of one-score games, and that was kind of the name of the thing with Patricia. We just did not win one-score games. That's happening again. Very much so. But I thought it was interesting that a lot of that statistic of how many one-score games he lost took place in 2019. A lot of it happened. But I thought what was interesting is that if you look at the games that he had Stafford, he had a healthy quarterback, they were 3-2 in close games. 3-2. They had a win against the Chargers, a win against the Eagles, and a win against the Giants with losses to the Chiefs and losses to the Packers. Predictability-wise, it can be inconsistent. But in that Chargers game, why did they win? Defensively, they forced a fumble, missed field goal, interception. The win over the Eagles, downs, won the football game. Okay, now obviously Kansas City, they gave up a touchdown, so they lost that football game at the end. You take a look at the Packers game. They forced punt, interception. Here's the last four possessions for Green Bay. Punt, interception, which set us up to go up 9. Then we allowed a touchdown, and then the field goal. Now, obviously, there was a lot of controversy in this game because of all the, hands to the face and things like that. And then we won the next one against the Giants where their last possessions were punt, downs, touchdown, but that was down 2 scores with a minute left in the game. So my point is that defense, most of the time, is where you win at the end of football games. You don't have to be great. That defense was not great. It was not great. But situationally, you got to show up. And right now, whether it's a breakdown in coverage, someone getting beat in coverage, giving up a big lane in the run defense, we have been basically awful in situational, got to have it get off the field downs. We are not even getting our offense. Most of the time, our offense isn't even getting back on the field. And that has been a massive difference between the past and now. Those good years where we had a lot of wins, we weren't blowing everybody out. I mean, you take a look at a team like the Giants this year, right? They're not on the Bills level. They don't have a lot of blowouts. They're not beating multiple teams by double digits. That's not how they're winning a lot of their games. They're winning a lot of close-score games. But you look at how they're winning those close-score games, they're winning them defensively. They're getting off the field. They're making a play defensively late in the game when you need to. And right now, the Lions just aren't doing that. And they haven't for really the last 2 years. They've made a couple. The majority of the time, they're not. Majority of the time, they're not making plays when the game is towards the end. And right now, where the Lions are constructed roster-wise, I do believe that the Lions are kind of in that mix where obviously they can compete with everybody, because if they couldn't compete and it was just like, well, hey, they just don't got the personnel, the game wouldn't be close. Right? The game would not be close. The games are close. And not all close games have been 40-40. There's been some this year now. Philadelphia, Seattle, which really concerns you. It's like, can we get a stop at all? Miami. But last year, there were multiple games that were lower scoring and close. But when we needed to get off the field, we couldn't get off the field. We talk about the secondary. there are some things to me that definitely have to happen. But obviously, again, we knew the Lions secondary was a massive issue coming into this offseason, so they were going to have to address it. You only can do so much. The pass rush rate has not been where we need it to be. We've had injuries, like Romeo hasn't participated. There's been other factors, absolutely. But individually, we knew that this was an area that had to get better. You get Jeff Okudah returning, and Jeff Okudah, now just because he's playing, maybe that could just be it, and that's kind of what Dan Campbell put it on, that he'll still continue to progress, like basically giving no credit to Aubrey Pleasant there. But Okudah's been pretty darn good, and he's continued to improve, which has been nice for us. You can absolutely win with Jeff Okudah. You drafted Kirby Joseph. Kirby Joseph has been very legit at safety for us. It hasn't been perfect, but my goodness, aside from some missed tackles, this guy's been pretty outstanding for us in coverage in the back end. I mean, I've loved what I've seen from Kirby, especially after seeing what he was in the regular season, or the preseason versus now. Deshaun Elliott. He's been basically what you thought he would be coming from Baltimore. He's been pretty darn good. Obviously, his run defense has been really good for us. Some misses in coverage, but it's been definitely good enough to win with. But then that brings you back to the questions of, okay, we talked about third down. Why is the player in this position? It comes back to personnel usage. Why in the world was Deshaun Elliott ever benched? I mean, we came into that game against New England. I was like, wait, why is he not starting? That doesn't make any sense to me. That is not the problem. And obviously now he's back and starting because he made a pick in that game. He was never the problem. Like, that made no sense to me. So then you have questions about that. It's the same thing I always bring up. Hey, last year, the Lions were going to roll with Bobby Price. They didn't see in practice that Jerry Jacobs, like, oh, hey, that guy can kind of play. Maybe we should give him a crack at it. Was struggling so much at corner over the top that they finally gave Jerry Jacobs a crack at it. And obviously, Jerry Jacobs was pretty darn good for us. Now you have questions about what kind of personnel they're playing. Juju Hughes, it's really his first time playing, and he's been solid. I'd put him in a solid range. He's had some breakdowns like the one against Minnesota, but he's been solid. I thought last week he looked pretty darn good against the Miami Dolphins. Amani has been a big disappointment this season. One thing we know about Amani, though, and you saw it from last year's film, he's not very good at man. He's very zone dependent. Most of the season, the Lions have played heavy man. They're still top 3. The last 2 weeks, more zone. We'll see where that goes. But for this season, he hasn't been very good, and he's really struggled in man coverage. He is a scheme-dependent zone coverage cornerback, but we knew that. Mike Hughes, he's better in man coverage than A.J. Parker. He just is. But the Lions benched him for A.J. Parker. Now, he was hurt last week. We'll talk about Jerry. And then Will Harris, I think he's improved. He hasn't played a ton this year. I think he's very limited in man coverage, but he's very smart, and he's very solid in zone coverage. Yet the Lions still came into this year playing a lot of man coverage, which we already hit on. Okay, we've already hit on that. Before the bye week, Lions played a ton of man coverage defensively. And obviously, they had some big-time issues doing that, and it's a change they have made. We'll see where it goes. But it's clear to me, and Dan hit on it, so he's aware of it, that Jerry needs to look, and I mean Mike Hughes also needs to look. Mike Hughes, and I don't care where they get a look at. To me, it's look. A.J. Parker, he's just a matchup problem. He struggles in man coverage. He's smart, but he struggles there. I look at it and say, look, both those guys need a shot back at it. And if that's, look, we want to try to put Jerry in the slot. Go for it. If he can play in the slot, right? That's fine with me. And then you can have a battle where Mike Hughes competes at outside with Amani. And Will Harris can be in that mix too. But Mike Hughes should get an opportunity to look at outside if Jerry plays slot, because Mike Hughes was really solid at outside cornerback when he played New England and had to come in due to injuries. And on top of that, in the past, that's what he's played a majority of the time. He hasn't played a lot of slot. We brought him. There's a reason we signed the guy, because we knew AJ wasn't very good in man coverage. That's why we signed him. That's why he started a slot. Then they benched him. That guy needs to look again, even if that is on the outside, or flip it. Jerry playing back on the outside would make sense, because that's what he's done. He needs to get a look at it. I mean, really, at this point, if he's healthy, he should start over Amani, no questions asked. If you're going to put him outside, he should absolutely start over Amani without even looking at it to me. Because what's the worst? Oh, he plays terrible and we have to take him out at halftime. Okay, so what? I mean, really, so what? That's what we've gotten from it, that position anyway. So what's the worst that could happen? Let's throw him out there. Let's see what it looks like, because last year he was good enough to win with. And as a number 2 cornerback, that was. Okudah's been your 1. You can win with those 2 guys. They're not great. They're not elite, but you can win with those 2 based on what we saw last year. And Mike needs to be back in the mix to compete for a spot. All this does is it puts the spotlight to me on Aaron Glenn and Dan Campbell even more, because usually you would fire the defensive coordinator who's in charge of this. The defensive backs coach, been here for a year and a half. Why are you firing him, right? Last time you fired Anthony Lynn, you didn't fire the quarterback coach and say, man, that guy is not getting it done. Like, no, you fired Anthony Lynn. You passed Aaron Glenn and you went to the defensive backs coach. That's fine, and it could have been the right move. I'm not saying it's not, but what I am saying is it's got to improve now. It's got to improve, because I don't know what they're measuring it on, but there's got to be something that you're measuring it on, because otherwise you're just guessing, and that is not going to get you anywhere. It's not going to get you results. It's not. Us just guessing and saying, well, we like this guy, that's not going to get you anywhere. You're not going to know where you're going, because you're not going to know what's good and what's bad. Measure it on something. I don't care what it is. Any advanced analytics that you got. Doesn't have to be on wins and losses. But situational statistics, maybe. Something like that. I mean, I would. Regardless, though, it's got to be better. However the Lions would it. If he moved to safety, right, that was another move. We talked about all this, though, coming out of the bye. I didn't hate the TJ Hockenson move, okay? We traded TJ Hockenson for 2 fourth-round picks for 2023 and 2024 in return for a second-round pick this season, or upcoming draft 2023, and a third-round pick for the 2024 draft. That was the trade that we made. Now, I believe one of those conditional picks turns a fifth-round pick, not a fourth, if the Vikings win a playoff game. So there's that little thing, too. So we made that move. We traded within the division. It's probably the thing that I like the least, because you're just going to see it. And, I mean, it is what it is, right? We traded with them to go get Jamison Williams. I didn't have a problem with that, so I'm not going to get too mad about that, but it is something that you're going to notice, and people are going to bring it up anytime TJ makes a play just because we traded him within the division. So Brad said he's, understands that's going to happen, but I'm just saying it's going to happen because you made that decision. But it must have been the best deal, and that's why they took it. When Brad Holmes discussed how this trade kind of came about, he said that it started off quietly, and then there was some interest there, and I guess because of the Vikings and their injury that they have with Irv Smith Jr., there was some, like, okay, we got to figure this out. We have to go get help here. So that, because of that urgency, it may have led Minnesota to giving up a little bit more that Brad Holmes was willing to deal for and make the trade for. And when you look at TJ Hockenson, there's no question in my mind that we're going to miss him for the rest of the season. And there's no question in my mind on that. And when you just look at the production that he has, look, definitely for TJ Hockenson, I look at him as a good receiving target. Not great, not the Travis Kelce type, but he's a good receiving target, meaning that he can pretty consistently separate from most linebackers, not always, but from most linebackers, he can get some separation. Versus safeties, he's nice in the slot. Schematics that we did in terms of like the out routes that we would hit when we would put him in the slot, of course, that was an area that he could eat. Now, he didn't consistently separate from defensive backs, so I thought there was some limitations there. So I thought he was a good receiving threat. He made pretty much the catches that he was supposed to make, and every once in a while he'd have some great catches. I didn't think he has the best hands, but he has some good hands, and he had 3 drops on the season, 17 first downs this season, and those are the 2 areas where over time Hockenson has been huge for us, okay? Third downs and also in the red zone. And even when he doesn't get the ball in the red zone, you saw it in that Dolphins game, how he draws safety attention and it opens up Swift one-on-one in the red zone. And the red zone is a lot about matchups and being able to find those matchups. And what this trade does is it basically takes away a matchup from the Detroit Lions. I mean, you think about a game like the Dallas Cowboys. Now, sure, the Dallas Cowboys, he didn't have the biggest stat line in that game, 4 receptions for 48 yards. But without having a DJ Chark, you saw that they looked to TJ Hockenson. They try to create matchups and try to create plays to get that guy open. Now, that wasn't the big play over the top threat like a Khalif Raymond, but to attack the middle of the field, try to get him on linebackers, they tried to do that with Hawk, and he was involved there. And then the out route that he hit again from the slot position. You saw against Miami, 3 receptions for 80 yards. One of those was just a massive play that he had on the corner route. He was very impactful from the slot on some of those out-breaking routes, okay? That's something that I think for sure we're going to miss when we get an off-coverage safety lined up against him. That's something that I do think the Lions will miss in the immediate time. Seattle was a huge game that he had like the 179 yards, 8 receptions on 12 targets. We're going to miss that. Now, when I look at a guy like James Mitchell, based on the college film, so there's a lot here that has to be proven. I think he has similar run-after-catch ability to TJ Hockenson. Hockenson wasn't super dynamic when the ball was in his hands. I think he started to add some of that to his game, which was really cool. We've seen that now twice this year, Seattle and Minnesota, making something happen with the ball in his hands, just not going down. Unfortunately, now Minnesota's going to have that guy. But James Mitchell, I thought one of the best parts of his game coming out of the draft was his ability to extend plays, run after catch, and I think James Mitchell honestly could be on a very similar level there with TJ Hockenson. Now, the receiving game, he had good hands in college, and he has enough juice to separate like TJ Hockenson. Very nice athlete, but coming off the injury, and there's still a lot there that needs to be proven, and he's young, so I don't think he's going to be as precise. Plus, on top of that, he's got to earn that trust with Jared Goff, and they may have, we're going to find out, but we do know Goff likes to throw it to his tight ends, and he'd like to throw it to Hockenson, and sometimes it got him into trouble trusting that, like we saw week 1 in San Fran. So we'll see where that trust level is at, but that is something that else that is going to have to be there and developed. And again, last week he had that 1 reception, which was nice. I think he's a little bit more raw in the route running than Hockenson, but I do think athletically he has some of the upside that gets near Hockenson. Now, as a blocker, I like him in the second level in terms of, outside runs, screens. I like that ability. In line, I don't know if it's going to be fantastic. We know Lions have used that a couple times, run blocking. He's had some issues there. I think it could be sufficient eventually, but it can have some issues. And in pass protection, that's an area where I thought Hockenson was improving, even though it still wasn't great. It's still an area I thought that he was improving. James Mitchell would probably struggle there as well. So they also talked about Shane Zylstra that they could bring up off the practice squad. They do have options. When we did not have TJ Hockenson last year, you look at the end of the season, and the Lions still had some production offensively. You talk about Denver, Arizona, Atlanta, Seattle, Green Bay. Only 3 of those 5 games Goff played in. Denver, you scored 10. Remember that one. Arizona was our second win of the season. We scored 30 points in that game. Zylstra had a reception. Kabinda had a reception. He had a little touchdown. Not much there. Atlanta, Seattle, and then Green Bay, we scored 37 points to end the season. So we still were productive, but it was a very small sample size to look at. And especially now where you're concerned is that, yes, New England is a little bit of an outlier, but teams that can play man coverage and really force you to win with matchups, Dallas, we looked to Hockenson. Also, pass protection wasn't fantastic, so some of those over-the-top plays weren't there, so it was like, okay, win quickly, get a matchup that you're comfortable with throwing. That is something that I think the Lions will miss, unless James Mitchell steps up and immediately takes over and he's just balls out. I think James Mitchell had high upside. He had the knee injury, I think knocked him down the board. I really do. I think there's a potential that he could be more of a receiving threat, honestly, than Hockenson. Blocking, I don't know. I think he could be, though, especially run after the catch. But right now, I think instantly, we're going to miss TJ Hockenson, which is very unfortunate, but it's just the case. He's a good player, okay? I didn't think he was elite. When you start to talk about some of those top-paid tight ends, kind of the $14 to $15 million per year, I can see why Brad Holmes doesn't necessarily want to go into that market with Hockenson, and I wouldn't have been mad about that. Plus, it's going to reset when the salary cap goes up. So there is that side of it too. They didn't do a negotiation early, which if you would have did a negotiation early, you possibly could have got him on a cheaper deal if he was going to reset the market. But now that you waited, if you would have kept him, brought him back, and then try to renegotiate when the salary cap goes up, now that number gets even higher. So there may not have been that kind of interest originally anyway. And again, I think a lot of that is positional value. But also on top of it, I don't think Hawkinson's the top type tight end in the league. I think he's a very good tight end, but I don't think he's one of the top few in the league where you kind of felt like that, where even if it's not your cup of tea position or usually how you value by position, like receiver and corner and things like that, he's not at that level where maybe they wanted to go that kind of price. So I don't have an issue with the trade from a team building perspective. If I was on Madden, I wouldn't have an issue with it. Actually, Hawkinson's pretty legit on Madden. He turned like to 99 for me, so I actually wouldn't trade him. He was a dog on Madden. But real life though, like the actual game, like Kerryon Johnson, I guess put out there on Twitter that these guys won't be around that long if they're not winning. I don't completely disagree with this. Now, I get a weird vibe. I get the vibe that Sheila definitely, these guys are much more comfortable with Sheila, and that fact that they're probably not going anywhere this year. I honestly don't see a scenario where she moves on from it. It just doesn't give me that vibe. If they feel very comfortable based on the moves that they've made, that's what it seems like. I don't think this should be an excuse. With that, I expect the offense to struggle a little bit more. I expect the offense to maybe not be as dynamic as they were, because you're talking about not having DJ Chark, who's one of your highest paid offensive weapons, TJ Hockenson, who is your highest probably valued offensive weapon, DeAndre Swift, who's really, even when he does play, he only plays in like 10 snaps, right? I mean, you're talking about basically your top 3 weapons coming into this year, and you don't have JMO yet? Not there. All right, so obviously the offense, if it does take a step back, I don't want the idea to be, well, hey, this is an excuse now that we can use. Let that be an excuse. Look at what it is now and how productive they've been. Top 10 in yards, top 5 in yards, top 10 in scoring. You're taking another big-time piece away from the offense. Even though I don't think he's elite, it does give you things to work with Ben Johnson. So if he continues to keep up this high-level offense, I'll be even more impressed with Ben Johnson. And I'm already super impressed, and I'm already sold that this is the guy going forward. I love what he's done for us. But if that's the case, I'm going to be just like, whoa, hold up. But at the same time, I do believe James Mitchell could absolutely be a number 1 down the road. It's just how fast does he come into that, and how fast does he gain that connection with Jared Goff. But we're going to miss him, and I miss TJ Hockenson, okay? I already miss him. I haven't even seen him play for the Vikings, but it's going to hurt more every time I see him. Like, oh my goodness. They have Brock Wright, who's been just, someone that you can win with. He's been sufficient. And then as a number 2, not a number 1. And then also you have Jason Kabinda, which I think is kind of a forgotten name here. Don't forget Kabinda, because we did give him a 2-year deal, and obviously Kabinda isn't like a tight end, right? Now he's not that pass-catching guy. He's still, his hands, you don't really trust him to run like complex routes, but he can block. That's what he does well. He run blocks better than TJ Hockenson. So whether that's in line or they want to blind him as a fullback, that is something. And we did know this last week, is that when we did put a I formation, we used Brock Wright in that position. So getting Kabinda back does give you a little bit of run blocking flexibility. So I will point that out. And that was a guy that they signed for 2 years. So he is here next year, assuming as well. I do think it will hurt the offense, because you can see it in the red zone. Even when he doesn't get the ball, he's a massive impact player just when he's on the field. Like, they doubled him last time with safety help, and it got Swift open on an angle route. This move doesn't make it to where, well, I don't care what happens down the year. You trade away Hockey, gave up. Look, Campbell, you're locked in for next year. I don't care what happens. Because I'm not using this as an excuse. Because, again, the point to me is like, okay, Brad Holmes said it. We proved we can score points. Yes, Hawk may have been a part of that. To me, he's saying, look, we proved this offense coordinator knows what he's doing. Defense coordinator, I don't really know. They made a move, okay, but this defense has to improve now. I want to see that. That's what I'm looking for. This got to get better because we're losing close games because we can't do anything on defense. I don't have a problem with this move as a whole. I think, the trade value, a second and a third, right? Obviously, not going into the points there, but you got Lee McNeil in the second round. You've drafted Josh Pascal and Levi in the second round. In the third round, you've drafted Kirby Joseph and Lee McNeil. 3 of those 4 players I really like, and I think they're a big part of the future. Meanwhile, Levi could have been a miss. Unfortunately, it's an injury thing, right? So one of those second round picks, maybe they go to a guard where Big V has one of the biggest cap hits. Now, it'd be kind of interesting trying to get out of that after this season, but it could go to somewhere like that. A second round pick goes to a guard. He could plug in and start. There you go. But I think value positions as well. Like I've emphasized this. The 2 positions, when people say, hey, man, where do you want to attack? Cornerback and receiver. Like those are 2. We need another great receiver. J-Mo, I think, can be the one, but we're going to need another really good receiver because that's the NFL today. And also, you just have to take a look at salaries by position. Tight end, if you draft a tight end in the top 10, you're basically paying him top 10 money immediately just because of where tight ends are paid in the NFL right now. Value of each position is important. Cornerbacks are pretty highly valued. They're pretty expensive. I think they're like $15 million on average for the top 10 in the league. They're pretty highly valued, right? Edge rushers are highly valued. Receivers are now highly valued, which even Brad Holmes hit on when they drafted Jamison Williams. So those are 2 positions, specifically corner. Like I'm saying, I go take a top corner. I don't care. Sign a big name, go get a top one. I don't care. If this money helps you open it up, great. Overall, I am optimistic that if the Lions have the right personnel in the field defensively, they will greatly improve and that this team can start to win some of these close games that they're playing in. And maybe with this firing, with some of the problems that we've had in the back end, whether that's run fits, whether that's coverage, over like the last year and a half where we just have guys not on the same page, if some of those could start to dial down because they really show up in some of those critical, crucial moments, I'm optimistic that we can win some of these close games. But we'll just have to wait and see. And again, now you flip to the offense side and say, hey, look, this side, they got to be better as well in these crucial moments. And I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, we're talking about the 1-score games. It has been a majority of the time the defense that you point to, right? Last year, you can say San Francisco, the first game, offense didn't get it done. You still gave up way too many points. But yes, the offense still had a chance. They didn't get it done. But Baltimore defense, Minnesota defense, Cleveland was the backup quarterback. So that one, I kind of have it a little bit on both because he still could have got a stop. And he did decide to punt it to him. But either way, Chicago clearly on the defense, right? An 8+ minute drive, that can't happen. But I should point out to remind you that in the Chicago game, multiple offensive line penalties led to the punt. We shot ourselves in the foot, and the Lions got in a similar position almost to this last game against the Dolphins. Minnesota, the offense scored and won that game. Atlanta, offense, he threw a pick, but that was Tim Boyle. And then, of course, the Green Bay game, which was a little bit of both doing good to finish that one off. But then this season, Philly, defense, and at the end of the game we needed to get a stop. We couldn't get it. Minnesota defense breakdown. You were still up by 3. Yes, you could have went for it, but then that's your coach deciding not to go for it, and you took the field goal. But you were still up by 3. At least hold him to a field goal, right? But you have a breakdown in coverage, 2 chunks, and you give up a touchdown. Seattle defense, he couldn't get off the field in that game. And of course, Miami, that one goes a little bit to both. You had an opportunity to get off on 3rd and 8, and you couldn't do it. But with that being said, yes, you could have converted. And by the way, quickly to touch on that, because I know we didn't touch on this last game, I do feel like this was one of Goff's better games of the season as a whole. Maybe his best game that he played this season. In that play in particular, I'm not really mad about it because I look at it as going down the road. If Goff's in that situation where, yeah, he's got a 4-2, and he explained what he saw. There was a 0 look. They changed the play. They got into a different formation, and they took away St. Brown. You got to remember there's timing within an offense, so you can't just like, okay, hey, this guy's gonna, there's timing within an offense. So the first guy was taken away. His next look, he looked over top. No safety help, one-on-one with Josh Reynolds. His guy did have him beat. I think he missed the throw a little bit, but I don't have an issue with him taking that throw. I'd rather him take that throw than be hesitant and be like, I don't know if I want to take that shot. Like, no, that's your guy. He beat him. I need you to have confidence in yourself to put it up there. If you miss, you miss. We'll live with the results. But he needs to have that trust and confidence in his ability to make that play, because if he doesn't, now we have a problem, right? That's going to be a problem down the road. But in this case, that one goes on both sides, offensively and defensively. But it's the majority where, yes, the Lions are right there to compete. Their defense just has to be better in critical moments. They don't have to be a great defense, and I think they will improve, which is going to help them a ton once this cornerback situation, Jerry gets healthy and he starts to play again. But I'll also say that, yes, as bad as they are, you still have to be better in some of these clutch time moments. Even earlier in the game, these aren't counting towards this, but like a 3rd and long, some of the decision making. there hasn't been the evidence to prove that this has been great for the Lions, and the jury is still out there to me on Aaron Glenn. I am optimistic as always. Those are kind of my thoughts on everything that's going on right now. We do plan on going live tomorrow with Rad, and I think we're going to get Michael Banks on there too, so that should be pretty awesome. With that, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on all of this, and we'll touch on it again tomorrow. Just kind of my thoughts on a lot of it. I know I kind of went overboard there maybe with the numbers. Got off track a little bit, but that's just what I do. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out. Oh, and by the way, you guys like the lights? Man, I don't know. Is it turned red? I got a remote, but I don't know how to use it. I click the red button. It doesn't turn red. It's green. The off button doesn't work either. So I don't know what's happening. Somehow I got it to start changing colors, but I don't know how to. There's orange on here. I've never seen it turn orange. And it's blue again. So I don't know what's going on. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.